Hi, I'm Ever. I also go by Sada, so don't be alarmed if people call me different names. Welcome to the last panel. This is right before the keynote of the Atlanta Radical Book Fair. It's been really wonderful to have you all here today. If y'all attended any of the other panels, they were stellar, and hopefully we'll be able to do that for y'all today as well. So this panel is about CRT, Don't Say Gay, and really the state of education and the wave of right-wing repression that is facing it right now. So to talk about that, there's three incredible, brilliant human beings right here. And I'm gonna briefly introduce them, and then we're just gonna flow right in. We're gonna leave some time at the end for questions too. So if anything comes to mind, feel free to jot it down. Then you can come up here and ask a question, or if you can project from your seat. Cool? Okay, amazing. The lights are sort of blinding, so I can't see much. So speak up if there's a problem or if you can't hear one of us, okay? Okay, so the three amazing panelists. All the way to the left, yes, that's left, Rokia Monique Rogers. Rokia has been working with children. Yes, you should woo. You really should. You really, really should. Rokia has been working with young families, young children and their families for about 25 years now. Rokia is getting a lot of woos too because she's an incredible organizer in the Stop Cop City movement right now. She's part of the Weelani Coalition that's brought together young children, preschool networks, indigenous folks, and organizers in Atlanta. So Rokia is going to talk to us today, and Rokia is also hyper-connected to the panel that unfolded before. Jonathan Peraza Campos, I've had the privilege of working with closely. You should woo. You should. Jonathan is an amazing organizer, specifically concentrates on, how many of y'all are from around here? Okay. Buford Highway? Folks know Buford Highway? Okay. So Jonathan specifically organizes in Buford Highway, which is sort of known as the immigrant corridor of Metro Atlanta, and builds up Latinx power for young people. He's also got like 7 degrees and is working on another one at Georgia State right now. So Profe Jonathan is also joining us today. And then last but certainly not least, Kaitlin. We need some applause. Yes, yes. So Kaitlin is a young person who has been moved by the many goings on in the world in the last couple of years, was already involved. The uprising of 2020, that was what our first panel was about, took it to the next level. Kaitlin's been very involved and also very intentionally uses the internet to become further involved and to amplify her voice and amplify the autonomy of young people. So one more round of applause for these amazing, brilliant people. So just to do a little bit of backgrounding, and Jonathan is gonna do a bunch more, but how many of y'all have heard of CRT? How many of y'all hadn't heard of CRT up until like maybe 2 or 3 years ago? Right. Yeah, that's a common experience. How many of y'all have heard about the book bans that have been happening? Don't Say Gay, does that ring a bell for people? Word. So in the United States, just in the last couple of years, we've seen what started off as anti-mask protests in a lot of school districts because of school closures happening. At the height of COVID, there was an intense right-wing repression led mostly by white parents, but really by well-paid staff members of right-wing groups. And that really formed into and morphed into what we see now, which is legislation happening about what is discussed inside of public school classrooms. So 42 states in the United States have put forth decisive concepts bills, which are things like anti-CRT, which are things like book bans, which are things like Don't Say Gay. So again, that's 42 out of 50 states. That actually passed in Georgia here. So we have that already in effect here in Georgia. There's been over 30 states, 32 states, that have banned books in the last couple of years. totaling to about 2,500 banned books in just the last year alone. So that's the climate that we're seeing now. And so Jonathan is going to talk to us a little bit about what CRT is, what it looks like. So Jonathan, take it away.
Hello, everybody. So raise your hand if you can explain to me, like you know what CRT is. Raise your hand. You don't? Guess what? Nobody else does either. CRT is something that is limited to academia, very much so. It started in legal studies. Lawyers, scholars of law started developing it in the 60s, the 70s, right, with the civil rights movement, because all these lawyers are talking about how the justice system is neutral. It's here for all of us, right? The scales are balanced, whatever. And then black law scholars were like, that's not quite true, right? And so they were devising these kinds of theories about how law is very much racist, how the criminal legal system is meant to target people of color and black folks primarily. It is not meant to be just because it is operated under a white supremacist system. And raise your hand if you've heard of the terms white privilege. What about intersectionality, right? What about systemic racism? That is CRT. These terms that we use in the mainstream today come from this body of work developed over the last, 60 or like 40, 50 decades, right? Where law scholars were trying to talk about, hey, law is not neutral, law is very much racist. Racism is fundamental to US society. The narratives of people of color matter when there are these groups in power talking down on us and making up lies about who we are as people of color. Intersectionality, we are not just one category, we are many different identities that shape our experiences in the world, right? In different ways, and so that's what CRT is. And with a lot of the divisive concepts bills, Georgia being one of them that passed a bill like that this year, they are telling teachers, you are not allowed to teach about slavery, racism, inequality in this classroom, in your classrooms, because you are indoctrinating our children. Mm-hmm. The language that they use is that they are instilling in children a sense of shame, guilt, and suffering. What was happening to children of color before in the school system, right? And so CRT is not something that any of us are very much familiar with unless you've been in grad school for 20 million years and you've taken all these classes, right? They're accusing teachers and their teacher trainings of getting this content that they then use to indoctrinate children. But teacher training is whack at best. Teacher training is so limited. Teachers and teacher school take out maybe like 1 or 2 diversity classes in which these concepts do not, they try to, get some of this content, but they don't learn it to the extent that critical race theorists do. I am a critical race theorist. I teach critical race theory, and the only reason that they want to create the CRT boogeyman is to further kill the ability of children to think critically about the world that we live in, to persecute teachers who are teaching the truth, and anybody in the education system that aims to teach the truth about the reality that we live in so that we may take action against it. And when we look at Don't Say Gay in Florida under fascist DeSantis, they're persecuting trans kids, queer kids, from being able to be themselves. They are creating an environment hostile to these children. And here in Georgia, we're seeing many of the same attacks on queer, trans, kids of color to protect white supremacy and the transphobic, homophobic, queerphobic structure that we live in.
Yes. Yes. Rokia, what does that look like in your classroom?
What does that look like? I just want to piggyback on what Jonathan said and talked about how teacher education is whack. And let's just start with that. And before getting into what does that look like at the Highlander classroom, a context for us, we are preschool that works with young children 6 weeks to 5 years of age. So very rarely do you think about conversations in terms of critical race theory and preschool children, but it is absolutely essential work. And just a reminder for us that our schools were modeled after factories, the capitalistic grind, and so forth. Our schools were built to teach children to be workers, in essence. So part of our work and what that looks like is disruption. And so, again, how teacher education is whack is a lot of thoughtful self-reflection on our part of the ways in which systemic racism and intersectionality have impacted us. In many ways, we've lived it every single day, as a black woman. You've lived it but not always giving it language. How is it actually impacting the classroom? Who holds power in the classroom? Whose voices are being centered? And if you're not keenly aware of that, you could be co-signing on to white supremacy without a higher level of knowledge and so forth. So a lot of our work began with studying critical race theory, and again, how we have in many ways internalized white supremacy, and engaging in really a painful process of self-reflection. And then what does that mean for our everyday practices? How do we disrupt the systems? And in many ways for us, that was reclaiming African values, reclaiming indigenous values, really thinking about our image of children. And the image that Jonathan offered here, it's interesting, is a very weak image that our society holds of children, that information should be poured into their heads, it should be indoctrination. We're going to train them to be workers. Reimagine a different kind of educational system. Reimagine an educational system where children had agency over their bodies. They had freedom to think, where every child could live into his or her fullest potential. And so thinking carefully about that and how in concrete ways that impacts is really holding up and having brave conversations and pointing out and showing children in practical ways systems. We often say young children can't understand systems, and that just hasn't been true for us. For example, we celebrate the Day of the Dead, and children will bring in, they call them the dearly departed or those who've gone back to nature, but will often include those who have been killed by their government. And children notice the patterns of who is black on that altar, who is brown on that altar. They're noticing what is happening to black and brown bodies by the police. And this is a way which just naturally you're making tamales, you're singing, but you're also holding up people who have been harmed by the state within your environment. But really, again, talking about freedom and agency is creating a space where children can make choices, where there's not a hierarchy in the classroom. Children are not just rewarded for being good. We often have this good behavior versus bad behavior, where you really want to have children have a voice. I don't know, and does anyone in here happen to have a toddler?
I'm a nanny for.
You're a toddler for, yeah, so what is that like on any given day?
I feel like it's such a, I was actually thinking about that with you talking, just like how even the things that you're saying are going to affect how I'm trying to like teach him emotional regulation right now. And the bodily autonomy is like a difficult piece when he is becoming bigger and lashing out and like, you know, teaching him these like behavioral corrections in a way. I don't even like that word, but like reinforcing something where he can express his emotions and not harm himself or others is like,
Right.
wow.
So, for example, children do a lot of pushing back. And they push back, and in a hierarchical classroom, you aim to suppress it. You want children to be obedient and follow the rules. But if you're reimagining a different society and a different community, you welcome the challenges, you welcome the questioning, you welcome and invite their pushback, because we imagine those are going to be children who grow up who question the state, who question authority, who question those who claim to have power over those bodies. So every time you're thinking about your interaction with a young child, whether it's an infant who's crying, there's some theorists who said, well, let them cry it out. Well, how do you show your community for a young infant that you're going to be there for them and show up for them if you let them cry it out? And so we realize very often, especially with young children, that they have innate ways of knowing. They share collectively food, all of these things that we've set a schedule that over and over again teaches it out of them and teaches them to be workers in a capitalistic grind. So that's just a little bit of it.
We'll dive more into it.
Dive more into it.
Yeah. But Kaitlin, as someone who has maybe been through the U.S. public education system more recently than the rest of us, even though we're all young, you know, what has your experience been to be growing up in this wild time of going from Obama being your president to Trump to pandemic to biggest rebellion in U.S. history? What is it like to be a young person in this climate?
Okay. So, what a loaded question. I think of, so I grew up in East Cobb. I went to Kell High School. and it wasn't the best experience. But for our school and for, I guess, others in the county, if you wanted to coach a class or coach a team, you had to teach a class. So my AP US History teacher was the football coach or baseball coach. It wasn't the best education we could have gotten. Really weird lesson plans that like he just put together. But I think I was in 3rd grade when Obama came into office, and that was
Excuse Jonathan's shock right now about
yeah.
his age and the year, and
Yeah, I didn't realize
it's a
our age gap
safe-ish
to the other
space
day.
around age.
But I was in 3rd grade, and I remember being really excited that, we had a Black president coming into office. And then entering my sophomore year of high school, my dad was deported under his administration. So that was my first reckoning with identity politics and how they really don't mean that much. Doesn't matter who's in office, it's still the US government. But I guess into the spaces that I'm in now, I'm in a Latina-based sorority, so we've been able to do a lot of really cool work with organizations that directly impact us. For example, I go to Georgia State, I'm a senior. There's a Latin fraternity who, they do a gene drive for El Refugio. Have y'all ever heard of El Refugio? Cool, love them. So there's a detention center, Stewart Detention Center in Lumpkin, Georgia, and that's where my dad was held. And we went to visit him one day, and I was wearing leggings, so it was against the dress code, even though I was 14, visiting my father. And we were able to go to El Refugio and pick up a pair of jeans just for free, and that was really cool. So now being able to be in spaces where you can join these organizations who have the autonomy to host events that directly serve us have been really, really impactful for me, and it's been really a saving grace given, all of these experiences in the last 24 years.
Jonathan, I'm wondering if you can lay out what you feel like has been the response, maybe the liberal response to this anti-CRT stuff, to these book bans, to the don't say gay stuff, and then within that, how do you define community power, and what has that looked like, building up that power in response to those things?
Have y'all voted yet? Go vote. Please, go vote. No, please. You want to make change? Go vote. Go vote right now. Go vote. You have to vote, right? That's how you make change. You vote. All right, y'all. Come on. Liberals have no imagination. Liberals have no imagination, and when we get stuck on continuing to keep riding the horse, the Ferris, what is that? The horsey
A Ferris
thing?
wheel?
The one, the
merry-go-round.
merry-go-round.
I
When
don't
we
know.
ride the liberal merry-go-round, we're going to stay in the same place. And so, I think that, voter engagement, electoral politics, that's cute. It does something for someone somewhere, right? But I really don't think that, and I think that education policy, as we're seeing these CRT bans and the book bans, is starting to make liberals kind of pay more attention to education, especially as we have a teacher shortage where teachers cannot keep up with the awful conditions imposed on them by the education system, right? Especially after the pandemic response. And we don't teach CRT. We do not teach CRT. We don't want anything to do with that. So you don't want children to realize that we live in a racist society and that we should do something about it. People want to get away from CRT because it's being banned, because it's evil now, because the Republicans said so. I think we should teach CRT. We should very much teach CRT. We should very much teach young people and teachers to think critically about how deeply, fundamentally racist this country is, but also about what we can do about it. How movements before us have built power around it, have organized around it, right? And so I think that we need to be teaching CRT. We need to be thinking about how can teachers build power with other teachers? How can we look to labor movements? And how can we look to teacher unions like powerful unions like the Teachers Union in Chicago, who can shut a whole fucking city down by working together? I think that we should nurture children's desire to resist and push back against authority, because if they are able to speak on their own behalf, they will, at that early age, they will be able to do it forever and with other people as well. We should teach children how to resist. We should encourage teachers to build power together and resist. Our schools should have young people and teachers at the table, and we need to be organizing so that schools do not listen to bureaucrats sitting at the school board and people running the Georgia Department of Education and the Federal Department of Education. We need to be the ones to build our own schools, and if they won't give us the schools that we deserve, let's build our own fucking schools in our backyards, in our neighborhoods. Find a space, use your living room. And this is not anything new. Our communities have always been under attack. Black, brown, indigenous, immigrant communities, working class communities have always been under attack. There has not ever been a decade when we have not been persecuted and under attack, and yet we have built power within those moments. We have built our own schools, such as with SNCC and the Freedom Schools in Mississippi, such as the Black Panther Party's breakfast program, the Young Lords, a Puerto Rican kind of version of the Black Panthers, the Brown Berets, a Mexican-American version of the Black Panthers. Less militant, but they did something. They were building their own programs and Mexican-American women in the early 1900s would literally just find a barn, or local people would build a little classroom in their neighborhood to teach children what they needed to know to be empowered in who they are, to be able to speak their language, learn their history, and get away from a structure that tells us we should only aspire to go to college and get a job, pass your tests, get good grades. That is not what liberation looks like. That is what compliance, obedience looks like. And so liberals can keep telling us to vote, they can keep telling us to, get Stacey Abrams or whichever person that they want in power. Sure, that does something. But when we do something, when we do not ask for permission, we just get our shit together and decide to collaborate and build what we need for ourselves, that is when magical things can happen that will build generations to come, that will fight against the state and resist against the conditions that we're surviving currently.
Yes. Yes. Very good. I'm wondering, we were starting to touch on this, Rokia, you were talking about it, and maybe Kaitlin and Rokia can begin to speak to this, but what does public education look like today? And why is this a question of youth's autonomy that's at hand?
Yeah, I can start to speak to it. To be honest, I haven't worked or spent a lot of time in the public school setting. I have my own privilege of being in an independent school, very much of what Jonathan described, and I wanted that independence, but you can clearly see, especially in Black and brown communities, the school to prison pipeline. It is about indoctrination. It is about a lack of power. And what really resonated with me, Jonathan, when you were speaking, was thinking about the ways in which teachers don't even hold power. In so many ways now, how their raises, their money is connected to testing and standardized testing, the level of stress that not only teachers are experiencing, but the level of stress that children are also experiencing. We never heard of children who were 5 and 6 years of age experiencing anxiety and so forth, that they're being denied basic human rights. It's a right of a child to play, to go out and have air, clean air, and now we're finding children are not even being able to have access to just going outside. So we know that what's being done in the classrooms are very often developmentally inappropriate. They're not based upon research. They're not based upon basic human needs. They are political. There isn't a political agenda, and those who are making those decisions are politics, not researchers, not educators, not teachers, those who've actually studied child development. And so that's very disheartening, and this is really where I'm resonating when you're talking about calling for power and a movement of a people, that we have to demand and claim something different for our children, because right now the systems that they are in is choking them.
In my experience, I lived in Cobb County my entire life, so I just remember there being a really heavy emphasis on dress code. I was out of dress code every single day, because I did not agree with it. But also, I was a mentor. I had mentorship as a class my senior year, where I would see the kids go into the administrator's office and be disciplined. And there was one student, and he was always in there because he just refused to do his work. And I would overhear their conversations, and he just had dreams of being a fashion designer. Just wanted to get into the arts and just did not want to change out for PE, didn't believe, like, why does he have to do all that? And it was just met with, corrective, disciplinary action, I guess, with things like of that sort. And also, like, I don't know, I just don't really remember learning anything, like, my entire, like, early education career.
I feel like all the teachers are like, are you sure? Nothing.
I remember learning about atoms every single year. We learned about atoms every grade level. I don't know, even now. But I don't know. I think it was maybe just my school. But I was blessed to at least grow up with a pretty diverse community. So I was able to make friends with people who didn't look like me and had different experiences. And I think that's what really I held closest to me.
And I think also, just to add, just the sadness of the presence of police in so many schools now. The ways, again, that we're starting this militarization so early with very young children, that we've seen videos of children as early as kindergarten being removed by police. This is intolerable.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to that?
Yes, I saw you pick up the mic.
We need to transform teaching. I take teaching very seriously, because why are we sending children to school for 8 hours every day so that they can learn nothing? Except to sit in a seat, take your tests, get good grades, be good, or go to ISS or get suspended, expelled, right? They're teaching us obedience. They're teaching us to be workers, right? And when I think about what teaching could be, what it could look like, I want children to see themselves in history. I want Black, brown, indigenous children to see themselves. My family is from El Salvador and Guatemala, and it took me until I got to college to understand why mental illness and alcoholism is so deeply ingrained in my family, when in my history classes I could have learned that this government bombed the shit out of my mother's country and destroyed my family. I want kids to see themselves, to understand their pain, but also to find healing, to have healers and therapists in schools that are not carceral, right? I want there to be, for schools to be sites of community, not sites of obedience and of requirement. We're just there because we have to be there. I've worked with children before that, it's been my job to be like an interventionist in schools where, it's my job to get kids back on track, to come back to class, to come back to school after being weeks, months gone, right? Failing all their classes. But when I talk to these kids and I just level with them and I'm like, hey, yo, what's going on? Why don't you want to be here? They tell me about how these teachers harassed them, made them feel stupid every time. They tell me about the fact that they have to work because a parent was deported and they have to help take care of their siblings, right? They're living in the world that we have built, that they are struggling through. And schools expect them to be and act a certain way rather than finding a way to nurture them, to engage them, to make them want to be there. And so I tell students, I feel you. If this was my experience, I wouldn't want to come to school either. That is your body telling you that you are being hurt, you are being traumatized, and your body is protecting you. So I feel you. And there's nothing that I can do about that particular situation. But I think that if we want kids to be in school, to enjoy school, we have to transform the way that we teach, to be culturally relevant, to be bilingual, multilingual, to validate our diverse children's identities and backgrounds, healing-centered education, social emotional learning, so that our kids can learn to live in the world with other people in a healthy way. These are things that research shows, so much research shows that works, and yet our bureaucrats are being deliberately ignorant because that is not the kind of world that they want.
I also wanted to add on to that real quick. I was just having a conversation with one of my sorority sisters, and she's an assistant principal at Grayson Elementary School in, I think, Gwinnett County, I'm not too sure. Anyways, but she was saying how these kids now, they missed out on 2 years of social and emotional development, and they can't really focus if there's not a screen in front of them, because that's what they have been used to, since the pandemic started. So I feel like that's going to be a big thing that we're going to have to deal with really, really soon, just transforming the classroom and catching up on those years lost.
Yeah, I think that transitions us to we've laid out some of the right-wing vision of education and what it looks like, right? Which is not teaching accurate history, which is having a militarized and policed force in schools, which is compliance and obedience, and it's more about behavior control rather than living, rather than like being, rather than the exploration of those things. So we know what they want. What do we want? And I feel like it might be really helpful to, these folks have like brilliant visions of what they want. You probably do too, because all of you have experienced schooling. So I was thinking that maybe we could just take a moment, and if you feel safe, close your eyes. You don't have to close your eyes, but just to think about that public school building that potentially you walked into, and how education or schooling could look in your wildest imaginations.
Maybe you're ready, just shout it out.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Yeah, like I would love to hear, we'd love to hear, what are some of the things that you are imagining and seeing?
No prison buildings.
Right?
Enough swings for every kid.
Hella swings, yeah. Mm. Hell yeah, that's amazing. Yes, are they hiring? That's cool. What are other things? Sorry, what'd you say? They might be hiring. We'll talk later. Other things that came to folks' mind before y'all?
Having a space where I'd like to teach kids about plants, agriculture, just like the land.
Yes.
More accessible and healthy food.
Yes.
To follow up on, yeah, like having like available class time outside, or like being able to actually teach kids when you're in an environment that's not like a traditional school setting, but more, you know, in the grass, or
Mm-hmm.
next to a tree, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Play, laughter, and joy.
Yes.
So much more playtime.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. I heard no homework very clearly, but another one.
I said apprenticeship and opportunities to like work with people on their craft, like alongside them, and like a more relationship-based way of learning rather than, like a structure where like everyone has to receive it all at once, but like ways that you can like practice a craft with someone, especially related to the environment, since the children that are children now will be inheriting so many ecological catastrophes, and their ability to navigate the natural world and like notice what's happening in our environment will be essential to like humans' ability to continue to be on the planet.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What does it look like for y'all to build it out?
Ooh, so for me, school would be a place that really honored children's kinship with this earth, that reaffirmed the identity of each child, not for what they could produce in the future, but honoring them as a citizen they are today, and just for the sheer essence of them being on this earth. that supported children's celebration of diversity, called children to have language around fairness and justice, and courage to take action when needed. I mean, those are some of the things that we just live by every single day. And also really a place, we keep asking this question at our school is, how did you know you felt loved? Right? What does it mean to walk into a space and know this is where I belong, to have a strong sense of belonging and to feel love?
Before you answer, Jonathan, Rokia, you are doing some of these things at the Highlander School. So I was wondering if you could describe, especially for folks who maybe attended the panel before about Cop City, and there was a question that came up that I think Abundia started answering about children's involvement.
Of like, how do we help children feel?
Yeah, like what does it look like actually for children to be involved in an abolitionist movement?
Oh my goodness. So for example, we assume children, they have not commoditized the earth, right, yet. So they have a connection already to the trees. We'd ask them questions of like, what do we need to do for the trees to feel welcomed? As we were getting ready to plant, and the trees would say hugs and love and medicine and so forth. We talked to the children about fall and what was going to happen, and they wrote letters to the mother tree. So even before we went to the Weelani Forest, we knew children had a kinship with that. Instead of us pushing down on what they could write and what numbers they could add because they could become workers, we had to have moments of pause and modeling for them what it was like to offer blessings to the land, taking them to the Weelani Forest to make those connections, even before we told them the plans to tear down the trees. And so when we told them the plans to tear down the trees, they just couldn't believe that someone would tear down the trees. These were their friends, these were their people. I think Jonna works there. Tatum said, the plants need a blanket. And they were mortified. Cora put her hands on her, no, it was Jake actually put his hands on his heart and was like, they're tearing down the trees, we gotta tell the people. Do the people know? Do the people know? And it actually breaks my heart every single time I tell that, because when they kept saying, do the people know, the reality is that a lot of people don't know, but a lot of people do know. And we, because the educational system has taught us to be passive, it has taught that questioning out of us, but they aren't that space. So we really wanted to honor when they said to tell the people, so they made signs and we took them to the forest. And they had ideals to invite other children from other schools to join them and tell the people about the trees being cut down. So because we listen to children and take their ideas seriously, we could have easily been like, oh, that's cute. It's not cute. It's radical.
Yes.
Honoring them is radical. And so we want these children to grow into being revolutionaries and to know that their voice matters. So us being out there is honoring their ideals and so forth. And since they were in the infant rooms, we've loved them in every way possible and wanted them to know your voice matters in this space. So
and there was a children's rally that just happened in Little 5 Points yesterday.
Just a little bit. There was just a little children's rally with kids. Yes, with a lot of other incredible people and in community, that children, that youth are part of our community. When you spoke about how it's always been about the children, when they've stolen children away from enslaved Africans, when they took children and put them in residential schools for indoctrination, it's always been about the children.
Yes. Absolutely. All of that. Classrooms that just honor who we are. Let us bring our whole human into these classrooms. All of our identities, language, histories, values, talents, genius, beauty, all of that to be cultivated, nurtured in the classroom. That's what I dream for.
And what has it looked like in your community organizing and your education?
So, I do a lot of my work in Beaufort Highway, which is in it goes through all of DeKalb County into Gwinnett, which is where I grew up. It's a very Latino, Asian immigrant corridor. It's a lot more diverse as well. We have a lot of gentrifiers coming in because people love, the best Mexican and Asian food in Atlanta at our expense. We're not just food. There's a lot of working class people, immigrant, undocumented folks that live around there. And so my comrades on Beaufort Highway or folks that, are connected to Beaufort Highway, we have made it our goal to build our own kind of little school, our own little kind of education program where we are teaching the youth that we work with about, how did we get to the South? Why are Latinos in the South? Like, how did we get here? What is our history? What is just our general history? What are our Black and Indigenous roots? How, what is our multiracial, multi-ethnic history? So really learning about who we are, where we come from, and learning to be proud of it. But also learning about the community around us, right? Learning about Beaufort Highway, learning about Georgia, learning about the context that we're in, and also political education. How can we fight for our neighborhoods? How can we fight against immigration raids that separate our families? How can we fight to shut down ICE and ICE detention? How can we fight against policing that is increasing on Beaufort Highway, along with gentrification and rent increases? So giving political education, and I don't like to say that we're empowering youth. We're helping youth step into their power, because they are already powerful. They just have been led to believe that they are just passive subjects. They are just there to obey and listen, not just from the school system, but even from our own families a lot of the time, because we've been taught to be silent and passive, because if you stir up trouble, the cops can get called, and somebody's gonna get deported, or somebody's gonna go to jail, right? So really learning about how beautiful, genius, and powerful we are, and learning how can we fight back using our power, our genius, and our beauty for the world that we deserve to live in. And it starts in our own home. And we've had conferences, student organizing conferences in my backyard. We have gone apartment complex to apartment complex to give workshops. I've weaseled my way into schools and convinced parents and students to go protest outside of the school board. Using the schools, using nonprofits as incubators, but also just creating our own spaces in our own neighborhood where nobody can tell us what the fuck we can and can't do. We are just doing what we need to do for our community. That is the kind of education spaces we've been able to curate on Beaufort Highway.
So I actually had the lovely opportunity to attend Jonathan's Beaufort Highway People's Hub conference in July, and one of our workshops was imagining like our ideal school. And my group decided, having like home ec classes, like hands-on activities, no GPA, because your worth is obviously much more than just a number in a computer. And I completely forgot my train of thought. But I think really letting students kind of create their own lesson plans. So kind of having like an overarching idea, but then every student has the liberty to take that idea and then apply it to their own experiences, their own lives, and making it, their own and relatable for others to make those their own connections to.
Amazing. We're gonna launch into questions soon, but I'm wondering if any of y'all, just kind of while thinking about these waves of right-wing repression, what we imagine, what we want education to look like, if you have any last thoughts that you sort of want to share.
Yeah, some. I mean, just to continue what Jonathan offered, the need for us to take action, to organize, to fight for spaces for children to have freedom.
Thank you. So if y'all want, you can line up here. There's a mic, but you can also just project if that's better.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Langston Thomas, and thinking about my question, in my mind is my 14-year-old sister who's a 9th grader. And she goes to a different high school than I went to because I was in an educational context that was very damaging. And so when my mom was looking for a place to buy a home, I was like, no, Simone cannot go to that school. She cannot go there. Put her in a different environment that would allow her to be her best self, if you will. And so I guess my question, and reflecting on what you all were just saying, is how do you balance helping young people or students step into their power while also trying to preserve their innocence or protect them from elements of the world that they might not understand? Because there are distinctions, there are realities that are heavy and dark that I don't personally think children need to, I agree, children are always living in the world, especially if they're coming from different environments, but they still don't understand the totality of the darkness of the world. And so I think there has to be I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts are on balancing empowering and exposure with also like protecting and giving things in due time.
I'll just add a little bit of my perspective and then carry it on with Jonathan. So thank you for that question. It really speaks to our philosophy and the image that we hold of children, which is a really strong image of children, and pretty much any topic is available to be discussed in a way that is appropriate. Yeah. So whether it's death or police brutality or where do babies come from, we believe that children have innate ways of understanding, and that it's not necessarily our role to protect children. Very often we use that, like when we've had problems at our school, it's usually been to protect white innocence, particularly girls. But as you described, black children, brown children are living it every single day. These are children who I really want to honor and so forth. So I think in a developmentally appropriate way. For example, we described, the children created a mural for Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. They wanted to honor their lives and had them underneath the rainbow. And we shared with them that the police hurt their bodies and they went back to nature. That's the term the children use. We didn't give details of what happened. So my challenge would be for our community of educators is to really rethink the image of children that we hold of them, that they're a lot more capable of having what we call brave conversations than actually adults are. I think you create anxiety, you create a lot of things when you hold this office. This is not a topic to cover. If children question where do babies come from, there's a whole way you can offer that information without getting into the beautiful details of it. So, so that's my perspective. I'm curious.
I think a key word that you said was balance, right? We are not victims. We have never been victims. We suffer under white supremacy, under capitalism, for sure, and we have to talk about it. But we have never just sat down and taken each hit. Like, we've made art. We had our ancestor civilizations lined up pyramids with the stars using their naked eye. We have been scientists, artists, musicians, as well as social movement leaders and amazing writers. It is our duty to help our young people see ourselves as all of those beautiful, amazing geniuses that we have always been across centuries, right? I think that when you help a young person develop their sense of identity and who they are and help them feel proud of it, you are giving them a shield. You are giving them armor to confront the world that we live in. And so I think that, we have to talk about all those things that or wake us up to the reality that the world is not an innocent, beautiful place all the time, but we have been the ones to create the beauty that does exist. We have been the ones to contribute the artwork and the books that inspire generations and have shown the world that we are not just enslaved or exploited or being killed by police, right? We are so many of these other things beyond that, and when we know who we are, nobody can take that away from us.
Thank you for your answers.
Yeah, I'm here to cheer for you all and for Rokia. I'm now a born-again educationist because I have really bad experience with education. I don't remember too much. But then, since I've been organizing with you, Rokia, I look with hope and, I really wanted to learn and be there in the classes, be there with the kids. And so I, for you, I'm looking forward because I think that a lot of the curriculum is based on the land. And I'm wondering what is for you the importance of building up this curriculum with land and traditions, especially since you are, also from Central America and, with your traditions and your connections too. So those two things, are they important for you, land and traditions, and how you incorporate that into this more revolutionary curriculum?
Thank you, Abundia. So, Yeah, really honoring, I think again, this reclaiming for me personally for the School of African and Indigenous Values is just honoring the ways that I believe children are innately connected to earth and land, that they come up with much more than 5 senses, that they're intuitive, that they have so many ways of knowing that we teach out of them. So really for us as a school, it's been a return and a reclaiming and creating peace and harmony with the land, especially the land that we sit upon that has experienced and witnessed so much violence. So that is all that we do. You know, we are, not all that we do obviously, but outside, whether it's gardening, whether it's composting, canning, picking herbs to make tea, wanting children to use the teas for medicinal purposes and so forth. Imagine school where children are learning healing doesn't just come from a doctor, but that healing comes from this earth. Again, for me, that is again reclaiming what my ancestors would have known, but in some ways was lost. So I think that's been part of the journey of the school, and really again, that children don't commoditize earth and land, that they already have a spiritual connection, and our role is to really honor that. So much has been lost in colonialization, and we're here to reclaim it.
I think it's also really important, along with that, to acknowledge that knowledge comes from many places. Not just a teacher, not just a classroom, not just the university. Knowledge exists in all of us and exists in every corner of the land. Like, our body is a teacher. My body is teaching me right now that these lights are making me, I'm gonna get like heat stroke. Like, my body is telling me that I'm really hot right now, right? Our emotions, our bodies are our first teacher. Our families, our communities are another set of teachers that instill in us some of our first lessons on this earth. And, you know, and this goes back to like indigenous knowledge and indigenous like teachings, right? The land is a teacher. Back pre-colonization, before Europeans came and fucked everything up, like indigenous people were like, they were learning just by living on the land, by watching animals engage, by just cultivating the land and watching the seasons go. The land was their teacher. And so really, you know, coming back to the land as a teacher, coming back to our bodies, our families, our communities as our teachers. And, you know, I love to teach my students about, you know, our ancestors' folklore and myths and creation stories, like the Popol Vuh in the Maya community, right? Is about why corn is literally, like, we are literally children of the corn. Corn came from the underworld, and we as human beings came from corn, and just, you know, and we talk about, oh, like, that, you know, what foods do you eat that have corn in it? We hear pozole, pupusas, tortillas, you know, all those things. And it's like, you know, this is a sacred food. This food has kept us as a people alive for thousands and thousands of years. And it came from the underworld, it came from the gods. Like, that is sacred, right? So just really thinking about our culture, our family, our community, and the land as being connected to each other. We are one and the same. We are not separate. We are very much interconnected. Relying on that indigenous knowledge, I think, has to be a part of all of our curriculum, and learning from other cultures that really emphasize that, I think, is key to reshaping, like, our relationship to the land and getting away from industrialization and capitalist destruction of the planet.
I think also dreams too. Like, I love bringing up dreams with my friends who aren't typically into reading into the symbolism of them. But whenever I bring it up, it makes you reflect more on, you know, your external happenings, and then how your psyche is trying to make sense of it while you sleep.
We have space for 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. And I think there's, just before I get to my question, I was thinking there's just such a beautiful connection between what you were saying about innately trusting children, that they just have it in them already, and that, like, the anxiety around not letting them have that, because we're saying these topics are like, we're going to gatekeep these topics because this is an adult conversation, which is like speaking from, you know, 8-year-old Julia experience. Like, that connection between, like, trusting the body is like a really beautiful thing, like between, like, what the two of y'all were saying. So yeah, just chills. I want to reflect on that. My question is a little bit more practical, about classrooms and schools today in the United States, or what we call the United States. so I've heard words like charter schools, private schools, public schools. You're talking about the preschool you work for as an independent school. I'm curious to know about like the definitions of those words and like how they differ, and if there are other schools that exist in the United States, and what the law safety is around creating a school in your backyard versus, or like what a Montessori school counts as. And just a side question is like, have you noticed that there should be a maximum size to a classroom, that there's too much for one teacher, or is that a really not a black and white answer?
Thank you.
I mean, public, ran by the state, benefits from state taxes, state resources, also impacted by, state, federal legislation. Private schools, for profit, they get to decide, they make their own rules for the most part. They make money doing it, so obviously not accessible to everybody. Charter schools is a mixed bag. Charter schools are, run by companies, charter school companies that make bank off of gentrification and getting to admit a select group of people. Some charter schools are public and get public dollars along with, charter resources. Independent. Maybe you could speak more on like independent school and like your structure.
Yeah, we're just do what we want to do. And then also it's because we're early childhood education, we are licensed under, for example, a different agency right from the start, which is like your health department, whereas public school is a whole nother agency. So there are some rules for us that are just a lot stricter as it relates to health and health and safety, and it's a lot more control and like ratios between a teacher and a child, and health standards and so forth. So those are more regulated, more so than, for example, the design of the curriculum.
And in terms of school in the backyard, there's liability. And if you care about children, you should do your best to reduce any harm and risk, right? I don't believe that any classroom should be led by any one teacher. I believe in co-teaching. I think that if we want to model community for young people, we should show what it looks like by having a team of teachers being there to support a classroom of, whatever the limit is for that group of teachers. For me personally, 20, 30 is that's a lot already, but if I have 2 other people helping me out, we can make it work. And I think that that's a solution, to not segregate away students with disabilities and, students that are learning English. If we have all of our kids in one classroom and we're giving differentiated instruction with a team of teachers, we would not have these overflowing classrooms. We would not have overburdened teachers. We could make sure that students aren't segregated and made to feel different, and that comes with its own inequities. We could eliminate inequities by just having more community-based models that don't separate children and don't rely on a single teacher to manage the needs of a group of people, right? Young people, growing people, developing people. And so I think that there's just so many practices that we have to start dreaming up. And a lot of it, we don't even have to reinvent the wheel. Our predecessors in the past, our ancestors, for many of us, before social emotional learning was a thing, people were practicing what it meant to teach young people, in the Inuit culture in what is now occupied Canada, right? And parts of Russia. They teach their kids emotional regulation, by just showing their kids, hey, if you're hitting me, you're hurting me. This is me in pain, and there's so many practices in all these cultures that we should pay attention to, that a lot of them survived colonization. So a big part of it is going back to retrieve indigenous teachings from around the world, and teachings that we've seen in successful models, in Black and brown indigenous communities. The socialist Sunday schools were one, school structure in the UK. It was British, and they came to America for a bit, where they were teaching working class children to be proud of being working class and about socialist revolution, right? So we have to look back into history to retrieve what's been lost over time, and listening to the children. What do the children want? What do they need, right? I think that's a big part of it too.
Okay, we're gonna take one last question.
Thank you so much for the panel. It's been really inspiring, so thank you. I was just wondering about sort of this tension between building community resources and community institutions versus the fights that are happening in these institutions that are already so whack, are these spaces worth fighting for? The right has made it a fault line, the right is fighting in these spaces. Is it worth it to confront the right and fight over these sort of whack, really backward sort of institutions of education, or should we just be building our own outside of this? Yeah, just curious your thoughts on that tension.
And no pressure, but just one of you can respond because we're over time.
I'll take it on. I think that's a challenging question because sometimes time is essential, right? You've got a young child who, I'm always about fighting the system. I'm always about fighting what's being done because of just the way that the influence, the sphere of influence and so forth. So I'm about both. I think you can hold both up, that you can fight. And also there's really a need to create, again, schools where children, young adults, youth have agency and freedom over their bodies. I mean, a lot of our children have left. They've been able to go into public school systems. Some of them have gone into other independent schools because it was a continuum of what they had a right to have. So we can fight the system at the same time while creating these other spaces in community with others.
Thank you. Thank y'all so much for being present here today. Thank you, Kaitlin Woodward, Jonathan Peraza Campos, and Rokia Monique Rogers. And y'all basically have a 10-minute break before the keynote by William C. Anderson, the author of Nation on No Map. And we're going to, all the vendors are going to have to leave at 6 and stuff. So if you wanted to make any last-minute purchases, please do so now. Thank y'all for coming.